today's episode of BP Builds, we take a 1972 Pontiac 455 that has been sitting in someone's basement for an unknown amount of years, inspect its mechanical integrity, and replace old seals and gaskets. Our focus today is to make sure the engine fires up and runs before we drop it into the car. This is a gambler's engine, of which the history is unknown. It was a good find on our local classifieds, but the seller didn't know where the motor was actually from, but was able to identify it as a 455 Pontiac from 1972. We need to do our due diligence before running the motor by performing such inspections as dropping the oil pan, looking at the condition of the oil that remains in the block to check for metal shavings, particles, or anything which looks like evidence of bearing failure, pulling the valve covers, and inspecting the rockers and pushrods. The timing chain cover housing is cleaned and then attached with a new gasket and a new oil seal at the crank. A wire wheel on a drill and a metal gasket scraper make quick work of removing the old gasket on both mating surfaces. Other ways to clean all the surfaces are with a straight razor, wire wheel, Scotch-Brite pad, brake clean, or combination of all four. Metal scrapers are okay to use on cast iron parts, but should be avoided when used on aluminum parts because of the risk of scoring the surface and creating leak pathways. Although we would have liked to keep the car's numbers matching, we had only purchased the GTO as a rolling chassis. Buying a second-hand long block was the most convenient option. Being that the motor is from 1972, it has some differences than that of a Pontiac from 1969, such as lower compression from the factory. The advantage of this is that we should be able to run modern unleaded fuel, but the disadvantage is that there is a sacrifice in power. Late 60s, early 70s were a strange time for automotive manufacturers since they were changing the way they measured factory horsepower. There were many factors that contributed to this, such as insurance reasons. But let's face it, how much power do we really want to put into a car that still has 4 factory drum brakes? BP Builds already has some very fast drag racing cars, and the goal of this build is to be a sweet cruiser. There is nothing cooler than hearing the burble of a big block that is highly fuel inefficient while going down the street to a car show or the local ice cream parlor. We run a tap through the exhaust manifold bolts to clean out the threads. A thread chaser is the correct method to do this, but if you don't have these, a tap can be used. The block of the engine is cast iron, and cast iron likes to mix with the environment over time and turn into iron oxide. Chasing threads ensures that when we install the exhaust manifold, bolts will go in smoothly without friction and we can tighten them to the proper torque. As always when using a tap, use lots of lubrication. Make sure to clean the debris out of the tap or chaser before going to the next thread. Remember, if you start to feel resistance, don't force it. You could potentially risk damage to the threads. Back the tap out several turns to break up whatever debris is caught in the flutes. of the bolts on the exhaust header are difficult to get a socket on, and this is where having a good variety of tools, like ratcheting wrenches, is great help. It also helps that we are doing it with the engine out of the car and a space to move freely around it. Sometimes in cases where bolts are tough to get to, you might even need to create your own tools to get into tight spaces. In our case, we ended up cutting a 5/16 wrench in half. Technology has come a very long way since these motors were first made. An HEI distributor simplifies the spark by putting all the ignition components in one assembly that is extremely affordable. These systems cost under $200 and only need mechanical setting and require a vacuum source for its use of a vacuum advanced system. We run the spark plug wires based on the firing order GM cast into the engine block. With the engine at top dead center, wherever the distributor is pointed, that's what we call 1. We also need to add all pulleys, including the alternator, in order to run the main drive belt.
So what we're doing right now is we're trying to run this motor on the stand to show that we can get it firing. So we have the right firing order. We want to see our distributor works. We want to see that we have cooling flow. We want to see that we have oil pressure. We want to see...
Dan wants to hear the engine.
We just want to hit...
We want to hear burble.
Yeah.
Dan wants to hear the engine.
So we need compression. We need spark, and we need fuel. So in order for us to get the fuel, we're going to slap our carburetor on, and we're going to put a little bit of gasoline in the bowls, see if we can't get that thing to squirt in a little bit of fuel. To get our power, we're going to hook up 12 volts to our distributor. And we're also going to have the starter on here so we can bump start it.
The carburetor we are using is a Rochester Quadrajet. We attempted to rebuild it with fresh gaskets, but something's not quite right, and this needs to be looked at again, as we found out very quickly that there is a large fuel leak. If you are interested in seeing a rebuild, let us know in the comments. Unfortunately, we can't restrain the engine on the engine stand because there is no clearance for the flywheel. Without the flywheel, there is nothing for the starter to drive the engine with. Therefore, we must safely restrain the engine with a chain and hoist. The electrical system for this motor is pretty basic. It only requires a 12-volt source to the ignition coil and a surge of electricity to the starter motor relay to fire up and begin automatically metering fuel from the carburetor. We were able to bump over the motor with a few basic wires and a battery. Later on, we were able to get a new rebuilt starter from the local auto parts store, which dramatically increased the ease of starting the motor. A little bit of fuel is added to the carb bowl just to see if the V8 will fire up when we energize the starter.
Needs more spill.
There's fuel on.
After several short bursts, we are ready to try to get the engine to idle, so we hook up the engine's mechanical fuel pump to a gas can. Unfortunately, we have to call it quits when Josh spots a fuel leak from our rebuilt carburetor.
Push the throttle a bunch to get that bumper going away. Only if there's fuel in the ball. Hold on. Let me
Use some starter fluid.
Well, this is the let's pour some gas in there.
It's so full of fuel. There's so much fuel in there.
Okay, well, don't put any more in.
Because I see fuel everywhere.
Ready?
Everything is wet.
Here we
So
go.
then,
I should choke it.
yeah, wide open. What? This was fun. Watch your hand. You just touched the pulley.
Big leak. Big leaks. We get leaking fuel everywhere.
Where's it coming from?
Some seals.
There's some water on it?
It's not gonna ignite. I don't think.
No, it's alright.
It's not that hot.
Who rebuilt the carburetor?
Where's it coming from? I didn't see exact. It was almost like from underneath this plate, or like somewhere in this general region. Maybe.
Isn't that where the main float is?
The main floats down through there. This is the something to do with the idle. There's like a little tiny, like a foil, almost a foil piece of, looks like a feeler gauge.
Please subscribe to our channel to follow our progress, and thanks for watching.